Welcome to our first video for the second unit. And this video is going to be focused on political ideology. Let's go ahead and get started. Political ideology. We're going to start talking about political ideology in class over the next couple days. We're going to take some political ideology tests in the computer lab next class. So you're going to get a real feel for where you fall in terms of your own personal political ideology. And the way that we look at political ideology a lot of times is in comparison with what's called a political spectrum. And that political spectrum is basically a range of political ideas. And you're going to have two far ends or two opposite poles and all of that distance in between. All right, so we're going to be talking about political spectrum. The first one we're going to talk about is really a very general spectrum that is one dimension. And its focus is really an economic focus. Attitudes on the economy is going to influence how far to the right or how far to the left that your own personal political ideology is going to fall. Now, that whole concept of right and left goes all the way back to the time of the French Revolution, and it kind of relates to the positioning in the room with the French Assembly, where the monarchists were on the right, the more conservative, who wanted to maintain the monarchy, and on the far left you had your liberals who wanted the monarchy to end and have more drastic change. So really that whole idea of left and right begins from actual physical positions in an assembly room in France during the time of the French Revolution. All right, so we have the liberal views to the left and the conservative view to the right. And this is really a simplified version, and political scientists still kind of argue over the extreme ends of the political spectrum. Again, when we talk about U.S. politics, we're talking about the middle ground. Because even when you look at the most conservative or most liberal people in the United States, you're still going to be looking at that center part of the political spectrum. All right, so let's take a look at this basic spectrum. Here's our basic political spectrum running from the far left with our socialist communists all the way over to the far right with our fascists. And again, the centrist and moderate area, you'll see liberal and conservative. That's really our range. They're right in the middle of the political spectrum. All right, so let's get some detail and some general ideas of people who fall to the right and the left of that centrist line. All right, we're going to start off with conservative viewpoints, so we're going to start to the right. Some conservative viewpoints just generally are that people have a responsibility to follow the rules, to follow laws set by society. Also that punishment should be given to those who break those rules and norms in society. Prison time, big part of that. All people in a society should strive to live by traditional moral codes. And again, the feeling of conservatives is going to be that there's going to be some dangerous moral trends in society that we need to reverse. They also believe that religion should play a much larger part in people's lives. All right, some more conservative viewpoints revolve around the federal government not being involved in regulating business. Conservative viewpoint is going to be much more focused on a laissez-faire attitude where free market forces are going to keep order and maintain that market. There's also a big belief on the conservative side of limited government and smaller government, and also, which we talked about in the last section, devolution, where the power of the federal government should actually be forced down to the states and local government. That's where traditional conservatives are going to be much more comfortable. Another big idea here in the conservative viewpoint or on the right is the idea of the individual and individualism. So that idea of rugged individualism and maximizing your own abilities is going to be a big component of a conservative viewpoint. And then finally, government should pass and enforce laws that protect private property or personal property. Continuing on, conservatives would support laws. Again, a conservative person with a conservative viewpoint would probably support laws that would cut taxes. Again, especially taxes that were going to affect your upper middle, your businesses, and your individuals with higher incomes because of the progressive nature of our tax system. They would support any law that was going to support harsher penalties for convicted criminals. They're really going to limit or remove any restrictions on how someone could use their own personal property or their land. They're also going to make it much more difficult for women to get abortions. They're going to prevent states from recognizing gay marriage, and they're going to permit prayer in schools. Okay, so you can see there the religious element of the conservative viewpoint kind of coming through there. All right, so those are some basics on the conservative side. There are many more other viewpoints and things we can come or derive from these bases, but this is a good start point. On the left side of the spectrum, the liberal viewpoints, the government is going to basically be viewed as having responsibility to help those who are disadvantaged. The government is going to have a job in order to try to equalize opportunity for everyone and also provide a safety net for those who cannot support themselves. All right, so you can see the drastic difference there between the rugged individualism of the conservative and the liberal viewpoint, which is kind of like that helping hand. Liberal viewpoints also are going to embrace the idea of protecting personal freedoms. Again, that balance between freedom and security is really going to tip towards the freedom side when we're talking about a liberal viewpoint. Continuing with liberal viewpoints, we have traditional values. The belief of the liberal viewpoint is that traditional values are old-fashioned, and a lot of these ideas are really unfair to women and other minorities. The government is also going to have a responsibility to regulate, and that's a drastic difference from the conservative viewpoint where the federal government is going to step in and be a watchdog on big business. They're going to protect workers, they're going to protect the environment from all levels of abuse. Also, the government has the right to tell people how to use their personal property. So you're going to have a belief here in the idea of basically giving some guidance or some redistribution of wealth with the liberal viewpoint. All right, trying to create that equality and balance. So liberals are going to support laws that would raise taxes, redistribute the tax burden from the lower and middle classes to the upper end of the tax spectrum and business tax. Instead of harsh punishments in prisons, they would more or less gravitate towards drug treatment and rehabilitation. They're going to prevent businesses and landowners from harming endangered species, so there's not going to be much control on the use of, they would like more control over the use of property than what you'd find on the conservative side. They'd also be very interested in protecting a woman's right to an abortion and the extension of civil rights protections, so again, more protection for your minorities. And then finally, they would reinforce the doctrine of the separation of church and state. Again, a drastic difference between liberal and conservative viewpoints. And again, when we're talking about differences here in the American spectrum, where our political spectrum is pretty narrow there towards the middle. Okay, so we've looked at a basic spectrum from left to right, a one-dimensional spectrum. And the spectrum we looked at really focuses on the economic components of people's beliefs in terms of left and right. Sometimes we can look at a multi-dimensional spectrum, which is going to bring in two different dimensions. All right, let's take a look at that. So let's take a look at this other type of political spectrum where we can see two different dimensions being used. All right, so if you take a look at this other spectrum, you'll see a spectrum that's going to work from socialism to capitalism, and that's still our economic left and right bar, all right, our spectrum. And we're also going to see a vertical element there that's going to basically have the differences in our social equality. So we're not just going to have economics, we're going to have social issues. So we're going to have a left and right spectrum for control and regulation of the economy, all right, and we're going to have a vertical axis there that's going to deal with social equality. So let's look at social equality first. Up there at the top, you see libertarian. Let's explain libertarian very briefly. Libertarians are going to be very interested in total freedom. They're going to be interested in the idea that the federal government is going to be there to protect people, not from anything, but to protect their rights, to give them the ability to worship the way they want, to marry who they would want. It's like the ultimate version of liberty. They don't really want any government involvement, okay, in terms of regulating or limiting liberties or freedom. All right, so that's pretty wide open up there at the top. And as you work your way down that social equality scale, we're going to work our way down to totalitarian and authoritarian viewpoint where the government is going to be involved in everything. The government is going to be involved in kind of anything you can think of day to day, how people, where they're going to work, how they're going to act, how much access they're going to have to media, all controlled by the government. So what you can see there, when we talk about totalitarian, authoritarian, a great example would be Stalin, the USSR when under Stalin's control. All right, and if you were going to place Stalin on this political spectrum, okay, we would place Stalin there on the your lower left-hand side there, down near totalitarian, and over on the socialist side of the spectrum because of his economic beliefs. If we were going to place one of his contemporaries, let's say Adolf Hitler, we would actually place him on the lower right-hand quadrant Down with the totalitarian, they would agree on everything in terms of that control. The social equality would be about the same for both Hitler and Stalin, but the drastic difference would be that Stalin would fall in the lower right on the capitalist side. Hitler was a friend of big business. So again, Hitler and Stalin weren't going to get along, and again, Hitler really didn't like socialism very much, or the idea of the communists. So he would definitely fall in that other spectrum. Now, when we start taking a peek at contemporary politicians, what we'll find in the American system and most industrialized democracies, we'll find most of that leadership there in the upper right quadrant. On the capitalist side, somewhere there in between, as we head to the top where with libertarians, somewhere in that region there in the upper right, or we would find people like Barack Obama. Okay, pretty interesting. All right, pretty interesting when you look at world leaders and where they would fall. Now, we're going to do a couple different political ideology quizzes, and you're going to find where you are found on the simple scale from left to right economic views, and also on an advanced scale where we have these two axes. All right, that's pretty much it for this brief introduction to ideology. We'll be headed to the computer lab. Please make sure that you finish up that Google Forms exit ticket for this video. Thanks.